I think the other question on certain people's mind, especially Christians, is this movie heretical?
Right. He had my Catholic heart on his side when he presented a Mary with a vow of virginity who was presented in the temple. But then when the second half becomes an action movie, he lost me.
I think it's trying to present Mary as a girl boss.
But I think that's dismissive.
It's just bland to me. It's a bland treatment of the Blessed Mother.
If we think of Mary as a demure, docile, humble, painted statue that happens to be able to move, then we've done her a disservice.
All right, well, Netflix made a movie about Mary, or as my 2-year-old calls her, Murray. And so I'm really happy that Tom Hoops is here to talk about this movie. Tom Hoops is the host of The Extraordinary Story, a podcast about the life of Christ. And every week you go into amazing detail and you bring an enormous level of intellectual but also personal insights into the greatest story ever told. So Tom, thanks for coming here.
Thank you. And it's great to be here on the Catholic Film Club, which seems to be taking off to some degree.
Here we are again. Is this going to be as controversial a subject as Conclave?
The subject maybe, but I think the treatment is not going to be as controversial as the treatment in Conclave. Well, and as we pointed out when we did Conclave, there will be spoilers in what's ahead. So if you need to know how the story ends, read it here first before you listen to the podcast.
And for people who have read this, there will be spoilers of things that didn't happen in the Bible.
That's fair.
So I'll put that down there for continuity's sake. Yeah, I mean, so I think the reason this is coming out now is, it's the holiday season and Netflix wants to throw sort of a biblical bone to the Christian audience and give us something to watch over Christmas break. Do you think it's worth watching over Christmas break?
Well, we'll get into that. For many people, sure. For other people, maybe not. And we'll talk about why it's not just a biblical bone, but a bone which includes both Bible and tradition.
Goodness gracious. This is going to be a good episode.
I also wanted to share, as I mentioned, that I kind of have a thing against Bible movies in general.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so as a child, when I was not really into my faith, I guess I was still practicing my faith, I watched Jesus of Nazareth by Franco Zeffirelli on TV every year. For some reason, I don't know if I was interested in the movie or I just was interested in watching a lot of TV and my parents didn't object to that particular show. But I watched it every year for very many years it was out. And I found later that when I pray to Jesus, I am often praying to Robert Powell. And when I read about Peter, I'm picturing the guy from Fiddler on the Roof, who was also Peter in that movie. Absurdly, Anne Bancroft is Mary Magdalene often. It was absurd in the movie that she was a little bit older when the movie was filmed, that she would be Mary Magdalene. Anyway, and then I've seen treatments. For instance, Washington University did a study about how if you read accurate history and then watch inaccurate history, basically your brain gets wiped of the accurate history. Because what you watch, when you see words and motion and human figures, your brain tells you that's real. So I'm really hesitant to put a that's real mark in my brain about biblical stories that are near and dear to my heart, because I don't want Noa Cohen, who does a great job, I think, playing Mary.
Sure.
I don't want to say the rosary to her. Yeah,
that's such an interesting observation, because I guess I grew up on this TV movie called The Gospel of John, which I thought had a really beautiful portrayal of Jesus, the best I've seen, and it's pretty underrated. And I do picture that Jesus when I think about Jesus.
This is why you'll see in Eastern art and in icons, the depictions of Jesus and spiritual figures are a little bit stylized. They're not as realistic as the Western images. And that's why with my own children, I tend to like to show them the Miracle Worker. Is that the one with
that's
the
Anne Bancroft.
puppets?
That's Anne Bancroft helping Helen Keller
the
learn how to
Maker?
talk.
What is the Jesus movie with the puppets?
I've never heard of the Miracle Maker.
We show that one.
I love puppets.
It's a great job with these Russian puppets.
This sounds right up my
Jesus
alley.
movie puppets.
This sounds right up my alley. If
The
anyone's
Miracle
looking,
Maker, 1999.
It's with
Liam
puppets?
Neeson, and it's got a great cast.
Oh, excellent.
So I like to show them that because they're not going to pray to puppets, right? We don't,
Right.
But they may pray to Robert Powell,
Yeah.
or to Jim Caviezel,
Right.
right? Yeah.
That's so funny. That's so it's like a Muppet family nativity movie, or
It's not Muppets. No, it's like Russian marionettes that are well done and very artistic.
this sounds wonderful, and I'm going to check that out. Now, to return to this movie,
Yes, let's.
I think the other question on certain people's mind, especially Christians, especially Catholics, is this movie heretical?
Right.
Because when Netflix puts out a movie about Mary, who knows? It's all up in the air. I want to be told the real story, and not a movie that tells me it's going to tell me the real story right at the outset. Because that's how this movie opens. It says, "This is the real." Like, if you think you know my story, trust me, you don't.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to say I like several things about the way this movie treats its subject matter. Okay. I'm also going to say I really like the director has done a couple of interviews, one with the National Catholic Register and one at Alatea. Mm-hmm. He's a really heartfelt, believing Catholic who wants to introduce people to Mary, and not as like a painted statue that moves, but as a real living human person. And I 100% support that effort. I 100% support the effort to make Mary real. It's really hard to cast a real Mary because she has to be sort of luminescent, but also like a Jewish mom, like a hard as nails kind of character.
Yeah.
I think Noa Cohen, who's in the role, does as good a job as one can do. I mean, I think it's really hard to do that, and she does a fine job. But Catholic Bible nerds or Bible and tradition nerds, because Catholics do revere the Bible, we don't want any doctrine that denies the Bible or opposes the Bible or contradicts the Bible, okay? But we are a faith that, just like it says in St. Paul, is founded on tradition and scripture, not just scripture, right? Mm-hmm. The scripture didn't produce a church. The church produced scripture, okay? Like several decades, several centuries in that we produced the canon of scripture. So we believe in the tradition as well. And I love that this embraces the tradition. So people will ask, is Mary sinless in the movie, right? She is energetic and kind of good-naturedly mischievous as a child, mischievous, however you're supposed to say that.
Yeah.
But her only sins are sort of the sins that when a job interviewer asks you, what's your greatest weakness? And you say, well, I work too hard in the garden, or I give too much to the poor. Those are kind of the only ways she strays from the norm.
Let me just say this. I'm so cool that butterflies follow me around in a field, which is something that happens in this movie.
Okay.
As if she's like a mutant or a superhero or something.
Well, they're
not that she wasn't amazing.
So the movie has to say,
amazing.
In a movie way, this person is special. And you can't just have her be ordinary, because then people will complain, she's just ordinary. So you got to do something. So butterflies following around. I mean, what can I say?
I mean, look, there's another movie called The Nativity Story from like 2006 that I think functions more as like a movie, but the person that plays Mary, although I liked her in previous films, is kind of a wet blanket, seems to have no joy to her whatsoever.
Right.
This Mary does have a personality, at least.
Oh, absolutely.
So
that also has the Star Wars guy as Joseph, that other one.
Yeah, Oscar Isaac plays
awesome.
Joseph.
Yeah.
A little better, I would say.
Catholic nerds will ask, does she get presented in the temple? In fact, that's what I asked you when you had seen it and I hadn't. Mm-hmm. She does. She gets presented in the temple. This is something that Catholics celebrate on November 21st. Most Christians, or nearly all Christians for all time, have celebrated this. Mm-hmm. Eastern Christians celebrated it and celebrate it to this day. She gets presented in the temple as a young child. just like it says in a lot of Catholic tradition. And they even down to the director has her walk up the steps, which is often depicted in art of Mary being presented in the temple, kind of her having to leave her family behind and ascending to something higher. It's very symbolic in art, but it also really works in the movie. So I really appreciated that. There's also a great Rilke poem about Mary's presentation in the temple that's all about the dizzying flight up climb up the stairs.
Okay, so this is trying to adhere to tradition, specifically Catholic tradition, more than you might expect.
Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, any Orthodox tradition.
I mean, just the inclusion of Joachim and Anne at the beginning is, correct me if I'm wrong, a pretty solidly Catholic tradition.
Yeah, and it's also a tradition in those other Christian, sacramental Christian traditions.
Sure.
Yeah. People will also, Catholic nerds will also ask, does she vow to be a lifelong virgin? Because that's implicit in the scriptures where you see her answer, how can this be since I don't know man? This is literally a betrothed woman. And if she didn't have some kind of vow of virginity, she would assume, oh, okay, when my marriage is complete with Joseph, we're going to have the Messiah, right? Yeah. But that's not what she says. She says, how can this be since I don't know him? But it's made very clear in this depiction of the story that she is committed to lifelong virginity. And I found that, from a Catholic perspective, a great thing. Then there's the big question of, is there pain at childbirth? So this is a problem that a lot of Catholics have with Franco Zeffirelli's portrayal of the Nativity, where she's in pain. Well, in answer to the question, is she in pain at childbirth in this movie? Big time.
Sure is.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so the two ways of looking at it, some Catholics object. They say, look, if she's preserved from original sin, she would be preserved from the punishment that came from original sin, which famously to Eve is pain in childbirth. And then there are depictions of the virgin birth in some ancient works of the fathers that showed almost miraculous, bloodless type of, situation. But on the other hand, you have this long tradition of the sorrowing mother, of a son who doesn't hold back from experiencing all the pains that humanity experiences, and from a mom who a sword will pierce her heart, and she also is embracing the suffering of humanity. So I think the case can be made, and the case has been made by Catholic saints both ways, about whether there is pain or not at childbirth. So I'm happy with the movie's depiction of it.
Now, right after she experiences pain during childbirth, Anne is there, her mother. What's the background on that, you think?
Well, I don't know. First of all, I've got to say, I'm a huge fan of St. Anne. I only discovered her later in life and did a novena to St. Anne, which was answered beyond my wildest dreams. So I was like, oh, wow, who knew? And I figured, okay, whoever raised the Blessed Virgin Mary was probably a pretty tough cookie. I love, and this is probably bad on my part, I love that everybody is sort of ethnically appropriate in the movie except St. Anne. Yeah. And I guess Anthony Hopkins as Herod probably too, but she just looks like an Irish woman.
I think she's Dutch even.
Oh yeah, okay. But anyway, she looks like a St. Anne holy card rather than like somebody of the time, which I was on board with, but maybe that's bad to say.
It was a funny thing you would expect in this day and age. Just like, no, down the line, like we can't have a blonde lady be the mother of an Israeli actress, but there you go. I thought she did a good job.
Yeah, she looked like the lady on the holy card I had at home.
Cast for her abilities.
Yeah, I bet St. Anne probably was Irish.
Okay, well, yeah. So St. Anne's there, and she says "top of the morning" to you, and so right. Is that biblical? Do you think she was there?
No, she does not say "top of the morning" to you. Whether she was there or not, I don't know. The movie takes a lot of license with the story, which again is one of the reasons why I tend to be very careful with what I get into my head from non-biblical sources about Jesus. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's wrong to do. I think it can be very helpful in helping these characters come alive. I think it's clearly done a lot of good for a lot of people. Like the show The Chosen has done a lot of good for a lot of people, introducing Jesus to new people. But for me, I want the real deal, and so I tend to stray away from. But again, so this was probably a novelistic detail that was put in to draw out some point in the text, which they're clearly trying to focus on a few characters that the audience could stick with. So they had to have the villain Herod play a bigger role in Mary's life from early on than he would have in real life. They had to have Anne as her mentor figure in the first and second act, and they had to have Anna from the temple,
right,
as a significant source of the story's life from the very beginning, which I think is probably very true to life. If Mary was presented in the temple, and Catholics celebrate the fact that she was, then she would have been with a group of girls in the temple, maybe not dressed like the Handmaid's Tale from the other streaming
was
series.
The costume decision that really perplexed me.
Yeah.
Partially because they don't even really follow up on that. I mean, how can you dress someone in full red with a white collar and not realize, oh, this kind of looks like that Handmaid's Tale movie? But the thing is that the people at the temple don't act in an oppressive way. Mary's on board with everything she's doing there. So it's kind of a bizarre choice.
Yeah, in fact, so I thought they were going to go in a Mary's being oppressed direction when she gets in trouble for working too hard and comes back into class. But she actually just gets a kind of a good-natured little, comment from the rabbi rather than him coming down like a ton of bricks on her. So I like that.
So before we get into anything more, do you mind if I just sort of give my read on the movie? I guess that I really center on one particular anachronism, which I think is a window into what this movie is trying to do. When in the Annunciation, she does not say when the angel Gabriel tells her that she will bear the Christ child, she does not say, "Let it be done to me according to your word," or any variation on that. She says, "Let it be me," like the Elvis song. And to me, I was just kind of looking through Bible Gateway to see, is there anything close to that? The closest thing I could find was "Let it be to me," but still, that is like a complete different thing. So it's like, okay, why is it "Let it be me"? And, why is she being followed by butterflies in a field when she's 6? What is the significance here? Why this change? To me, I think it's trying to present Mary as a girl boss.
To a certain degree, sure, yeah.
In the sort of modern view of, girl power, hey, let's go. And certainly, I mean, as Catholics, we revere Mary like no other human being. And yet, is this the way that is this the best that we can do in portraying the really amazing humility of Mary? I feel like that is erased by saying, "Let it be me." Yes, it's me who's going to do it. Even changing lines or adding lines which are not, objectionable on a biblical sense or in a heretical sense, but she says to the baby Jesus after he's been born, she says, "I chose you as you chose me," which is in many ways correct. I mean, she said, "Let it be done unto me." That is a choice, and God did choose Mary, as St. Augustine said. But I think that's just reinforcing a thread in this movie of, are you familiar with the phrase "Yas Queen"? It's just
no, I'm not.
like "Go girl," it's today's "Go girl," and to me that's just it's not objectionable, it's just bland to me. It's a bland treatment of the Blessed Mother.
Well, let me say a couple things. First of all, I think labels like girl boss and pious girl can help us and hurt us. So at one period of time, if you called somebody a pious girl, it would seem like a slight, and it would put her in a category in your brain of somebody who just is checked out and right, sort of docile in an unattractive way. Well, now we've got the girl boss, right? I think I argued with you once that Maddie from True Grit, the new True Grit, was a Marian figure because she was so in command of the circumstances, and yet she would kind of get people to use their strengths for the good. That's pushing it, I know. But
if we argued about it, I submitted instantly. That sounds like a really cool take to me.
But you could dismiss her as a girl boss, Maddie in True Grit, right? But I think that's dismissive. Okay, so, and I get the line you quote, I think is terrible. The enunciation needs to be, let it be done unto me according to your word. It needs to be, if you're going to do a variation, it needs to be to me. You need the word to in there. Because it's something she's accepting. She's not stepping forward and grabbing the flag. She is and she isn't. But I also don't want to dismiss her as a girl boss, because I think if we think of Mary as a demure, docile, humble, painted statue that happens to be able to move, then we've done her a disservice. And if we take girl boss off the table because it has a cultural baggage attached to that particular formulation, so I think she was a strong woman, and I think in the story she's a strong woman. There are some girl boss elements, though. Like, for instance, these are not the droids you're looking for moment when she goes. There's a point at which she has to pass a guard with the baby Jesus while the guard is looking for the baby Jesus. And she doesn't say this is not the droid, the baby you're looking for, but it's the same type of thing that happens.
It's really a Marvel movie treatment of Mary. I think when I'm watching it, I didn't realize that DJ Caruso, the director, had a Catholic background. To me, it seemed like it was the Marvelification of Mary, and that's kind of why they went into the traditions of, the background of her parents, because it's like an origin story. It's really cool. She's like a superhero, and I guess maybe I'm just done with the superhero thing personally, but. I don't know. It's
but she does have an origin story.
She does,
and she is a special person who's supernaturally gifted.
Yeah.
And so, if you're using the tropes of our day to say true things about Mary, then it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, I guess I'm looking for something. When something like of this gravity is depicted, I'm looking, hopefully, for something timeless. Like I guess when I'm looking for the best when I can get it, and when I don't get it, I'm not, I don't know. It's hard for me to be.
You don't suffer that lightly.
No.
Yeah, I see your point. I think that's very wise.
Like there's things about this movie that people can praise, Anthony Hopkins' performance, I think, is super fun. He's chewing the scenery, but I think he's doing a fine job doing that.
I love it when Anthony Hopkins chews the scenery.
Yeah, he's chomping it. He's chewing it well. And people have praised the cinematography as well. But to me, it's a movie that has no focus other than to create frames that live in a vacuum and don't connect to each other, because they're not really telling a story. They're putting a lot of cool slow motion shots together. It feels like scenes from a documentary about the Nativity, where there's supposed to be a bunch of talking heads in between, but they just took out the talking heads and put together all the scenes. And what comes together is something that unfolds in some ways very randomly.
Okay.
the way the events, and inventing things that will be super cool. Like, what if Mary jumped off a roof that was on fire while escaping a centurion? And I think that DJ Caruso is a good director. I've liked his movies in the past, like Disturbia. But I just don't think it's good enough. And when you think about the Nativity story, do you think about Joseph like pulling a sword out of a centurion's like harness and using it to shove a sword right through the devil's chest?
No, in defense of the movie, this happens. You're talking about a dream sequence.
Spoilers, sorry.
But
For some
no,
of
I did object to the action figure Joseph in the movie, and I think the movie missed some really some really great opportunities to show the sacrificial Joseph. In other words, the real Joseph. So I agree. And what I hadn't gotten to yet was my critique of sort of the third act or the second half
for sure.
of the movie. I really appreciated, and he had my Catholic heart on his side when he presented a Mary with a vow of virginity who was presented in the temple on the steps. I was like, I was into it.
Yeah.
He had me. But then when the second half becomes an action movie, he lost me, because I think Marvel movies and the Marvelification of cinema creates this. It basically makes the argument that violence solves problems and violence is awesome. I call it the violence is awesome mistake, where what happens in your real life if you're in a violent situation, is usually you have either freeze or flight, right? Hopefully flight, but often freeze. It overwhelms you. And then what happens if you actually fight back is that you're haunted by a terrible thing that you have to deal with, right? It's not all fun, like sword fighting and stabbing somebody and then moving on and wrapping somebody up in a flaming net and then having them writhe and burn in your wake while you ride away. So it's very disturbing to me that you turn the Gospels into a violence is awesome story. I think For Greater Glory, which was a movie that came out years ago about the Cristero Revolution, made a mistake in turning that into a violence is awesome action movie. Yeah. And I think it's an even bigger mistake to turn the story of our Lord's birth into a violence is awesome action movie.
And this movie didn't invent that. I mean, The Passion, for as much as I enjoy it as a film, Mel Gibson's movie, indulges in violence. And I'm not even talking about the torture of Christ, which I think is the way that he depicts it and why is totally legitimate, and it affected me. I'm more talking about scenes like in the Garden of Gethsemane, where, when they chop off the centurion's ear, it's done in like this really cool slow-mo thing. And there's a lot of stuff that I think is Passion adjacent in this film, like the depiction of Satan and sort of inventing the way that Satan might have tried to tempt Mary out of her vocation, for lack of a better word. It's much more than a vocation, I suppose. But
yeah, so another recent Jesus' birth movie was The Star, the cartoon.
Never saw it.
And that became kind of an action movie thing at the end also, with this angry animal and these swordsmen who were like orcs with swords. So I dislike that whole thing. One thing that so in The Star, and also there's The Journey to Bethlehem, which is last year, was a musical rendition of the Nativity story. Both of those treat Mary and Joseph as sort of a conventional romance, like a romantic comedy, meet cute type of thing almost. In fact, The Journey to Bethlehem is kind of hilarious. If you look at some of their songs, it sounds like High School Musical songs, only about Jesus and Mary. I liked that the romance in this was not like that, right? Although, okay, so St. Anne does say he's handsome, which is not something I would imagine St. Anne saying. To try to sell Mary on the marriage to Joseph, because Mary's just not having it. But overall, there was kind of a meet cute.
I'm just saying, there's a meet
literally
cute
a meet cute.
There's a meet cute where Mary, she's washing her very, very, very yellow shawl in the river, and then she gets like, flying. She's like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And Joseph, who's apparently 19, is like, looking at her across the river. Oh my gosh, she's amazing. Now, to the movie's credit, it's not like, I think it tries to make it so that it's not romantic, but it kind of is romantic. But how could it?
Yeah. Thereafter, their relationship is not depicted as like a romantic comedy.
Well, it's not. It doesn't have the value that a movie like The Nativity Story had for its minor faults. I think it was actually a pretty good movie. I think that movie really gives a lot more to the Joseph story than to the Mary story. And I really felt like Oscar Isaac and the way that his character was written really showed the inner conflict that Joseph might feel. This Joseph
kind of
has
a Llewyn Davis Joseph.
The Llewyn Davis Joseph, yes. Or a Poe Dameron Joseph, if you will.
Oh, there you go.
But this Joseph does not have that journey. It pays lip service to it very briefly. But I was even interested in this adaptation. I don't recall the Angel Gabriel explaining to Joseph that the Annunciation. Joseph kind of just sort of comes to that on his own terms, I think, because he's accepted that Mary is a girl boss, and therefore.
No.
Okay, I could be wrong.
No, that was one problem with the, after the baby's born, Joseph says, "And what should we name him, Mary?" Where the angel clearly told Joseph, "You will name him Jesus. You, Joseph, will name him Jesus." Check out the Extraordinary Story podcast, the Joseph episode, for Mother Teresa's much stronger take on that whole Joseph narrative. So there's lots that I didn't like about his depiction of Joseph, especially the action violence at the end. But I liked that it wasn't the typical, Troy and Gabriella treatment of Joseph and Mary.
Okay, so Tom, we've gone through the things that we like and dislike about the movie. I guess back to the ultimate question, is it something that's worth spending 2 hours over your Christmas break watching, or is there something else that you might point people toward as an alternate?
Yeah, well, I'd point them toward this book.
Oh, wow. Hold on. Let me check that out.
So the New Testament, that's a great way to we also did the Extraordinary Story episode about the Nativity story, which has a certain take. There's lots of classic literature about the Nativity story. As I said, I am a little bit iffy on the whole let's watch a movie about Jesus anyway thing, because it gets stuff in your head that is different. But that's me. I say if you're a normal person, based on what we've said, you can make your own determination of whether you want to see it or not.
What about some advice that applies to me?
To abnormal people?
Yes. Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas?
I actually like your take that when you're approaching a matter of this significance, you want to give yourself the best, and you want to treat it with the greatest art possible. I think the case could be made that you could treat the Passion of the Christ as a piece of fine art worthy of adding to your Lent. I don't know if there's as strong a case. Okay, I'll say absolutely, you can't make that case for this movie being part of your Advent. So my go-to Advent movies are the Grinch animated movie.
Oh, okay. Wait. The 2D one from the 60s,
yeah,
or
that's
the one
right.
where
the 2D one from the 60s
sips coffee,
and then the Christmas Carol, It's a Wonderful Life. I think stories of human beings coming to terms with their past and with their sinful nature, but finding hope. That's the best Advent kind of story.
Yeah, Christmas is about redemption, and maybe that's at the heart of this story. We need to. I think it's correctly showing that there is a rot in the there's a rot in that King Herod he's the ruler, and he seems to be honestly going a little insane. But where's the redemption? Not that Herod needs to be redeemed, but I think a good Christmas story shows redemption, and this can, if you depict it in one way, it is showing triumph, which is great, but I don't know if it's really setting up as well as it could the fact that more people than Herod needed Christ to be born on earth. I think you need to show what society is going through, what the common people are going through, to really show the value of this within a dramatic recreation. Does that make sense?
That's very well said. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Let's do it.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is the Catholic Film Club. It's updated every week about new and old movies such as Mary. And please check out Tom's podcast, The Extraordinary Story, which is about the life of Christ. And Tom does everything in that podcast that he did here, which was bring an enormous level of insight into the most important story ever told.
Thank you very much.